Destination Newry, the morning programme. I'm Rowan Hand. Fire Chief Rod O'Hare is with me from the station just across the road. You're only round the corner.
We're neighbours,
You are indeed. Rod, we're talking about two things today. We're kind of coming out of maybe the season, coming into springtime, we're moving a little bit away from chip pans and the risk of fires, perhaps not. And we're also going to talk about road traffic accidents, because people don't always associate, and they should, the fire service with road traffic accidents.
No, in fairness, you're right, and anyone who's been watching the TV, Ron, will be familiar with the combined campaign that's run at the moment with regard to sharing the road to zero. And really the idea behind that is ourselves, in conjunction with the DOE and the PSNA, are asking people to help us bring down our road deaths to zero. Unfortunately, we do tend to lose people on the roads, and what we're asking is that they pay a little more attention and have a little more consideration for themselves and for others as they use the roads, whether they're cyclists, motorists or pedestrians, because invariably right across that spectrum of people we are having casualties and fatalities with accidents on the road.
We're not, it's my observation that we're not greatly helped by the latest piece of news coming out of the courts, that a solicitor up in Antrim challenged a situation in which his client was being brought to court for using his mobile phone. And the solicitor managed to get away with saying he wasn't communicating, he wasn't talking to anybody, but he was just checking for signal strength, that he was doing. That it's now within the law that you must be speaking to someone before it's illegal. That you are, according to this blinking thing up in Antrim, you are within the law if you're checking signals. And I would like to say that's a nonsense.
Well, look, you know, unfortunately, between clients and the judiciary and their representation, they're always going to argue the semantics of the situation. However, on our behalf, what I would like to say is anything that distracts you and takes your mind off the job in hand, be that driving down the road, crossing the road, cycling within traffic, should be avoided at all costs.
Absolutely.
You know,
so
you need to keep
no matter what the Antrim court has said, we actually appeal to people. When you're in the car, you've got the phone, put the phone away, switch it off and pick it up on the way out again.
In fairness, you know, it's not a big imposition in people's lives to go 20 minutes without a phone call. And with the advent of hands-free systems within the car, there's really no reason for people who need to be in communication not to be. The one thing we will say is, you know, the texting thing, totally different animal. It requires your thought pattern, your vision and your total attention when you're doing it. And to be quite honest, on the roads, within seconds things can change.
Absolutely.
So when you think back to your highway code and your braking distance, the braking distance are calculated from the point at which you apply the brakes. If you're distracted to the point where it takes you 20 seconds to actually realise you need to apply the brakes, you've got to add that into the equation, and that's where the calamities kick into us, unfortunately.
In a sense, in a more serious sense, it's a bit like smoking. It's socially unacceptable to smoke nowadays with people, but in the real serious world of well-being on the roads, it has become socially unacceptable for anyone to be using a telephone in his or her car.
Yes, and I don't think there's anybody out there who's adamant that they're out to break the law. I think it's just a habit we get into. There's a reliance, shall we say now, on mobile phones, whether it be for Facebook, whether it be for messaging, and what some people will classify as an important message really isn't when it boils down to it. You know, what I would appeal to people to do is, you know, put the phone out of reach and deal with those things. There's very little that you're getting sent in a text message which can't wait 10, 15 minutes until you're parked.
And that's a big, you know, that's a big step forward into the world of good practice and safety, because if you develop that habit, it excludes and extrudes at the other side of the chain the bad habit of listening, whatever. So the good habit of not having the phone switched on ousts the bad habit of dipping in and out of it.
That's the truth. In fairness, I think we all at times can think, oh, it'll only take me a minute, you know, but it's in that minute. Anything that happens to us, anything that's memorable, anything that's horrendous that has happened to us within our own experience happens very, very quickly. You know, and for the want of just waiting that extra amount of time rather than having to live with something on our conscience where we're questioning the actions we have taken. Well, I think it's really, really well worth paying attention to the job in hand, you know.
Your officers with you see the consequences of neglectful behaviour on the roads.
Unfortunately, you're right there, you know, and the guys, I have to say, are incredibly proficient and dignified in the job that they do. However, there's not a man within any fire station who arrives to anything like that who doesn't rather that he hadn't been called. Because in the end of the day, irrespective of whether it's a fatality or a bad injury, somebody's getting bad news to the house. And when you take that into perspective, you know, the services on the ground, ourselves, the possibly the police, the ambulance service, have to deal with the initial phase of that. And then, unfortunately, someone has to take the gruesome job on of going and passing that news to friends and family. And to be fair, that's heartbreaking. And the guys run this all through in their head when they're on the job doing the best they can for the people involved, because unfortunately we've been in this position before and we know how devastating it can be for families over simple issues that turn out incredibly badly for people, you know.
And you're seeing it there on the road. You're associating the vision in front of you with perhaps your own child, your own wife, your own brother, sister, whatever. You're seeing a family connection with people who are hurting and hurting badly.
That's true, you know. And the thing is, you know, I suppose we're very, very fortunate as a service where we have great support from the public. And they're very glad to see us arriving, and they know we will do the best we can for them in every instance, whether it's a fire situation, a social situation, whether it's community engagement or the RTC situation. And at this point, I'd like to thank the members of the community for the support that they have and in the past and continue to give us. And probably on that note, it's probably well worth mentioning that some of the things that cause us great grief would be when we go out and we're called for help and there's help required, we're very willing participants in what goes on.
Of course you are.
However, we do quite a bit of work within the community to address issues where we get calls which are, for want of a better word, hoax calls. Or when we get to a situation where we arrive to render assistance, and thankfully within this area it's very, very limited, but where we may be attacked. Some stone throwing in some areas. And to that ends, within my department, the Fire Safety Department, we work with the local communities, the community groups, to try and talk to the kids and explain to them. We had a very recent one there with the Carnegie Community Group where we spoke to them about this issue, and I have to say it's really heartwarming for ourselves and for the crews to know that there are people within those communities who are more than willing to step out of their way and go to some trouble to ensure that that type of behaviour is kept in check.
But you're making a very good point, that we're blessed in this area more than in some other areas that we know about. And that kind of abuse is a rare enough occurrence here.
Oh, it is certainly, you know, and in the end of the day, you know, we're very mindful and grateful for that, but it still is an issue that that causes us enough concern to ensure that we try to address it in every opportunity we get. So if anybody's listening to you from any community groups who are doing anything and they would like our involvement, please feel free to contact Newry Fire Station, and if we can assist in any way to get that message across, we're very willing to help.
It's a partnership for progress, isn't it?
It is indeed, you know.
There's no two ways about it there. Yeah, absolutely. Now, what about the chip pan business that you've just finished? There's a campaign to...
Last week we sort of paid particular heed to the chip pan issue. Now, I don't want to stand here and say people shouldn't be eating chips. That's not the issue.
Not.
However, what we have particular issue with is the old-fashioned type of chip pan where you actually have the saucepan with oil and the basket within it. Unfortunately, when these things are in use, you need to be particularly mindful and watchful of them, because left unattended, there is the potential, and a very great potential, for a fire to start when the oil gets to a certain temperature.
Flashpoint.
Flashpoint is correct. What we're advocating is certainly that people continue to enjoy their food, but we would like to see more people getting rid of that type of chip pan and moving towards the, you know, the thermostatic type that actually has the lid on. It's temperature controlled and it's a sealed unit, and we have much less problems with that.
It's incredible to me that people are still using the same thing as they used 50 years ago, a pot and a basket full of chips, and people have died over those 50 years, time and time and time again, as a consequence.
Certainly.
Kind of thing that one would think should be outlawed, got rid
Well,
of.
you know, in the end of the day, what we're appealing for here is, without trying to be draconian and placing bans on things, we're appealing to people's better judgment, to their common sense. You know, and that's not only in the appliances they use, but it's in the time and the manner in which they use them. So one of the issues that I would address with people would be, certainly, particularly after a night out, should one be hungry on the way home, it would be very advisable to take something home from the local carry-out, as opposed to go home under the influence of a few beers, having had a good time, to turn on the chip pan. It's a recipe for disaster.
Of course, occasion. You can see it. You can see it clearly. Is that indeed, indeed, indeed? And should there be a chip pan fire in the home, what's the way? What's the recommended way of dealing with it, Rod?
Well, one of the things about it is, because you're dealing with hot oil, which is actually on fire, the last thing you want to do is to lift it, because you can have instances where the handle on the pot may actually melt, and the next thing, the pot's all over the floor, and you're making the problem much worse than it is. So what we would suggest is, where at all possible, if it's safe and suitable and people feel capable of dealing with it, they should get a damp tea towel. And when I say damp, I mean damp and not wet, because the last thing we want to do is introduce water into an oil fire.
Yes.
Wring it well out, throw it over the pot, and remove the heat source. So turn the cooker off if you can.
But don't lift the pot.
Do not lift the pot. And then send for ourselves. We're more than willing to come and address it. The last thing we want to see people doing is trying to lift it and remove it outside.
No. And of course, people can buy a fire blanket, and they can locate that close to the in the kitchen, close to the site of the cooker.
It's a relatively inexpensive piece of equipment to have in your kitchen. However, some people do believe that they're a bit industrial looking, a bit domestic, or as opposed to being something that you'd use in a domestic situation. However, for the little expenses involved, they're well worth having. And as long as you have it somewhere at hand, you don't have to have it screwed to the wall as you would do in a commercial kitchen. If you have it somewhere where everyone's aware of it. And the most important thing is, it's not just the fact of having it, it's the fact of being aware as to how to use it. Because there is actually a technique where you fold the blanket back on your hands to protect your hands as you put it out over the fire, using the two tabs, you know.
Wow.
But that's the one thing we would suggest, if at all possible, and people feel capable, and this is very important, if they feel capable, they should cover it with a damp cloth, negate the power source, and send for ourselves. If they do not feel comfortable to deal with it, if they feel it's too developed and they're concerned, what we would suggest is, make sure that everyone's out of the room, close the compartment door, and send for ourselves. Yeah. We'll deal with it.
That way, oxygen starvation may well come to your aid.
Whatever's going to happen within the room, it means you're keeping it to the compartment of origin, you're keeping it to the room where the fire has started. And to be quite honest, within the town, the fire station's very well serviced here, we have plenty of personnel, and there's nowhere within the remit of the town that isn't accessible quite quickly. Quite quickly.
What have you been doing this last week? What's a typical week been for you? What were the main challenges over the last week, say?
Well, I suppose, you know, like everything else, Rowan, there's a constant strive for development to do what we do better. So the guys are constantly training. We're looking at how we do things. Currently, we're having an engagement around our stations where we're asking our firefighters what they think we're doing well, what they think we could do slightly better. And we're taking that on board and we're feeding that back into our area command. It's an area initiative. And really the idea is we're trying to develop our house to make the service we provide to the public better, so that they get the best possible service we can. So it's a constant evolution of evaluating what we do and trying to do it better.
Were you called out much the last week?
You know, there have been a few bits and pieces, certainly, yeah. We have been out to several things. Without going into specifics, we have had a few fires in houses, we have had a few car fires, we have had traffic collisions, and there's quite a bit of training or preparation going on at the minute for an exercise, a training exercise that we're going to do locally here to sort of test our resources to make sure all our guys and all our equipment and all our incident command plans are up to speed and fit for purpose.
And does that include, you know, chemical emergencies? There was a thing happened, there was a spill of chemicals up at a food factory up in the north somewhere over the last few days. Are you equipped if a container coming through Newry fell off and there was a leakage of chemicals? Are you able to deal with that?
Oh yes, certainly.
My
And
goodness. You had to do it at Warren Point Port once.
That's correct.
I remember the case when there
correct.
was a kind of a fumes came off from a cargo.
That's correct. And very recently now, in this past week, we had a fuel spillage that we had to deal with out towards Newton Hamilton. And all the stations would have a capability of dealing with that stuff and stopping it, making its way into our water courses. We would block the drains and we would work closely with our councils and the Environmental Health Agency to ensure that it's all handled very well.
You're great people.
Well, we try our best. We try our best.
You're doing hugely well. I think it's very confident to have you at the helm, sir. Rod,
thank you very much.
God bless
Rowan.
you. Go well. Take
Pleasure
care.
as always.
Good
Take
to see
care
you.
now.
We'll
Thank
play
you.
you some music.